On a quiet August morning in Lexington, Kentucky, police receive a call that would shock even the most seasoned investigators. Inside an off-campus home shared by students from the University of Kentucky, officers discover the unthinkable: the body of a newborn baby, hidden away in a trash bag, tucked inside a closet. The young woman at the center of this tragedy was not a stranger to the public eye. She wasn't an outcast, nor was she someone lost in the shadows of society. She was Lakein Snelling, a 21-year-old former cheerleader and one-time beauty queen, a student who had once worn the blue and white colors of the University of Kentucky Wildcats with pride. To those who knew her from afar, she was a picture of health, ambition, and youth. But behind closed doors, she was carrying a secret that no one around her fully grasped, a secret that would end in a courtroom, in headlines across America, and in whispers about what really happened the night her baby came into the world. Before we dive deeper, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we cover cases like this in depth, bringing you stories that shock, disturb, and demand answers. Your support helps us continue to share these stories with the world. The case of Lakein Snelling forces us to ask difficult questions about responsibility, mental health, denial, and the thin line between a tragic accident and a criminal act. Prosecutors allege that Snelling gave birth in her off-campus home during the early morning hours of August 27, 2024. She was alone in her bedroom, while her roommates slept nearby. According to her own words later given to police and doctors, the birth was not a silent one. She said she delivered her baby around 4 a.m., and that in those first fragile moments of life, she thought the child was not breathing. But here is where the story grows complicated. Later, when speaking to medical professionals, Snelling allegedly admitted that her baby showed signs of life, a little bit of fetal movement, and even a faint whimper. This detail would prove explosive, because the difference between a stillbirth and a live birth is not just medical, it is legal, and it can mean the difference between facing charges of concealment and evidence tampering, or something far more severe, like manslaughter or even murder. At the time of her arrest, Snelling was not charged with homicide. Instead, she faced charges of abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant. She pleaded not guilty and was released on bond, returning to live with her parents as she awaited her trial. But as new documents surfaced through the student newspaper, the Kentucky Colonel, the picture became darker and more troubling. Let's walk through the alleged timeline. Around 4 a.m., Snelling claimed she delivered her baby. She insisted she believed the baby was lifeless, but also admitted that after about half an hour of staying awake, she lay down and fell asleep. According to her account, when she woke up, she realized she'd been lying on top of her newborn son. The baby, she said, had turned blue and purple. She concluded he was dead. But what happened next added an unsettling layer. Instead of calling for help, instead of dialing 911 or seeking medical care, Snelling allegedly took steps to conceal what had happened. She wrapped the infant in a towel, placed him inside a black trash bag, and stored the bag in her closet, along with the baby's body. She placed bloodied paper towels and even the placenta sealed in a Ziploc bag. Then she attempted to clean the room. Hours after enduring childbirth and after losing her child, Snelling reportedly got up, left her house, and went about her day. According to documents, she didn't actually make it to class, but she sat in her car, ordered McDonald's through the app, and attempted to resume normal life. This detail is one that prosecutors and investigators have seized upon. What kind of mindset would it take to carry out such steps? Was she in shock, perhaps experiencing a mental break after a traumatic medical event? Or was she methodically covering her tracks, intent on making sure no one knew what happened? And then there were the roommates, living in a house full of young people. Snelling was not alone that night. Her roommates later told investigators that around 4 a.m., they heard noises, a thud, something falling, and then sounds that lasted nearly an hour. At the time, they didn't know what was happening, but their instincts told them something was wrong. Hours later, when Snelling left the house, they entered her room. What they found would haunt them: blood-soaked towels, signs of childbirth, and inside a bag, the body of a full-term baby boy. The roommates called the police, setting into motion the investigation that has now left Snelling facing criminal charges. Before we continue with the chilling digital evidence uncovered in this case, take a moment to drop a like on this video. It helps more people discover these stories, and it lets us know that you want us to keep digging into the cases others shy away from. Now, let's turn to the digital trail. Police obtained a warrant for Snelling's phone, and what they found paints an even more complex picture. Reports say she took photos of herself while she was in labor, images she later deleted. But as many people learned too late, deleting something from your phone does not mean it is gone forever. With the right forensic tools, law enforcement can recover deleted data, and in this case, those photos may become pivotal evidence. Why would someone photograph themselves in such a vulnerable, life-threatening moment? Was it an attempt to document the event for herself, or a desperate, confused act during hours of pain and panic? Whatever the motivation, the deletion afterward suggested something else. The awareness that those images could be incriminating. The revelations about her online activity didn't stop there. Prosecutors noted that Snelling, once very active on social media, had largely stopped posting images of herself by the spring of 2024. The very period in which she was likely carrying her pregnancy to term. And yet, just weeks before the birth, she posted on TikTok, listing her goals. Among the emojis she used was one of a mother holding a child. To those who knew her, it was a contradiction too sharp to ignore. A young woman presenting herself as someone who dreamed of being a mother, while allegedly concealing a pregnancy and ultimately hiding her baby's death. The case raises unsettling questions about secrecy, denial, and intent. Why did no one around her, not friends, not family, not teammates, realize she was pregnant? Was it a matter of physical concealment? Or did those closest to her choose not to see? As we dive deeper, we'll explore not just the details of what happened in that house, but also the broader issues of hidden pregnancies, the legal definitions that separate accident from crime, and the haunting forensic challenges in determining whether a baby was born alive or stillborn. And before we continue, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that force us to look at the darkest corners of human behavior and ask why. When investigators arrived at the off-campus home, they quickly secured the scene. Crime scene photos, which later appeared in court records, revealed what could only be described as the aftermath of a secret birth. Blood-stained towels and sheets, a black trash bag, sealed and hidden away. Inside, the body of a full-term baby boy, along with paper towels soaked through with blood, and a placenta stored in a plastic bag. It was as though two worlds had collided. The normal life of a college student, with textbooks, makeup, and everyday belongings scattered across the room, and the haunting remains an event that should have been filled with joy and life, but instead ended in secrecy and tragedy. The questions came quickly. Was this baby born alive? Did he die naturally during or after childbirth? Or was his death caused by actions or inactions taken by his mother? For investigators, this distinction was critical because the charges would depend entirely on the answer. Medical examiners were tasked with determining whether there had been a live birth. One common forensic test used in such cases is the lung float test. It sounds archaic, but for centuries it has been used to assess whether a baby took a breath before dying. The test involves placing pieces of lung tissue in water. If they float, it suggests the lungs once held air, meaning the infant had breathed. If they sink, it indicates the baby may have been stillborn. But this test, while historically significant, is not perfect. Decomposition, infection, or even resuscitation attempts can affect the results. In Snelling's case, prosecutors have argued that there was some evidence of life, movement, sound, even a whimper. Defense attorneys, however, are expected to challenge the reliability of those statements, and perhaps even the forensic science itself. If you're finding the story as gripping as we are, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps more people discover these hidden corners of true crime, and it shows us you want to see more stories like this. The legal stakes in cases like this are enormous. If the court finds that the baby was stillborn, the harshest charges Snelling faces may only involve the concealment of the body and the tampering of evidence. These are serious, but they do not carry the life-altering weight of a homicide conviction. On the other hand, if the prosecution can prove the baby was born alive and then died because of neglect or suffocation, the charges could escalate to manslaughter or even murder. This legal gray area has appeared in other high-profile cases, in the United States. One such case was that of Brooke Schuyler Richardson, a young Ohio woman who, in 2017, delivered her baby in secret and buried the infant in her backyard. Prosecutors alleged she had killed the baby, but forensic experts clashed over whether the child had ever taken a breath. The jury ultimately acquitted her of murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment, convicting her only of abuse of a corpse. The similarities between Richardson and Snelling's cases are striking. Young women, outwardly living normal lives, concealing pregnancies from those around them, and facing accusations of intentionally hiding or disposing of their newborns. Both stories force us to wrestle with the unsettling truth. Sometimes a question of life or death rests on the thinnest of medical and legal margins. Snelling's defense team is likely to lean on this precedent, arguing that her baby was stillborn and that, overwhelmed and traumatized, she made poor choices in the aftermath. Prosecutors, meanwhile, will push to show intent, that her decision to place her son in a trash bag and hide him in a closet demonstrates consciousness of guilt. But what about motive? Why would a young woman, seemingly full of promise, take such drastic steps to hide her pregnancy and the birth of her child? This is where psychology comes into play. One possible explanation is a condition known as denial of pregnancy. It's rare but well documented. Women experiencing this condition genuinely do not acknowledge or accept that they are pregnant, even up to the point of labor. In such cases, the birth often comes as a shock, and the mother may respond in panic, confusion, or even dissociation. Others suggest that fear plays a stronger role than denial. For a college student like Snelling, a former cheerleader, a young woman with aspirations and a public persona, the idea of admitting to an unplanned pregnancy could have felt impossible. Fear of judgment, fear of disappointing her family, fear of derailing her education and future. These pressures can lead to dangerous decisions. At the same time, investigators cannot ignore the deliberate steps she allegedly took. Wrapping the baby in a towel, sealing him inside a trash bag, placing the bag in a closet, cleaning up the room, ordering food, sitting in her car, going through the motions of daily life as though nothing had happened. These are not the acts of someone frozen in shock for minutes. These are decisions made over hours. And so, the jury in this case will have to weigh the facts, the science, and the psychology to decide what they believe. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. We bring you stories like this every week. True crime cases that challenge our understanding of human nature and demand careful thought about justice. The public's reaction to Snelling's case has been divided. Some see her as a victim, a young woman who experienced a traumatic event alone, with no support, and who made terrible choices in her panic. Others view her as a perpetrator, someone who knew she had a baby, saw signs of life, and chose to hide him away rather than seek help. The fact that she once held a prominent position as a cheerleader and beauty queen has only fueled the conversation. News outlets have highlighted her past, painting a picture of contrast. The smiling, energetic student seen on the sidelines of basketball games versus a young woman in court, facing down charges tied to the death of her own child. This clash of images, the public persona versus the private reality, is part of what makes the case so haunting. It reminds us that we often only see fragments of people's lives, the curated versions shared on social media, the polished moments in public. But behind the smiles, there can be secrets too heavy to carry and choices that leave irreversible consequences. Now, let's turn to one of the most haunting mysteries of all, the father of the child. To this day, the identity of the baby's father has not been publicly revealed. Was he another student? A boyfriend? Someone she barely knew? Did he know about the pregnancy? Did he have any idea that a baby was coming into the world, or that his child would be found lifeless in a trash bag? The silence surrounding the father has left many questions unanswered, and his absence from public conversation only deepens the sense of secrecy. If he knew, why didn't he intervene? If he didn't know, what will it mean for him to one day discover that he lost a child without ever realizing he had one? The unanswered questions hang heavy in this story, just as they do in so many cases of hidden pregnancies and secret births. As the investigation unfolded, a broader picture began to emerge. Lakein Snelling wasn't just a random college student who happened to be caught in a scandal. She was someone with a visible presence on campus, a young woman many recognized from her time as a University of Kentucky cheerleader. Her image had once been tied to school spirit, athleticism, and ambition. That polished, smiling persona now stood in stark contrast to the haunting details police described in court filings. The juxtaposition fascinated and disturbed the public. How could someone so seemingly full of life and promise conceal such a devastating secret? How could the image of a cheerleader, a symbol of energy and positivity, be connected to something so dark? To understand this case fully, we need to step back and look at the psychology of concealment. Experts say that secrecy often grows from fear, shame, or denial. In Snelling's case, investigators noted that she hadn't been posting recent pictures of herself online, which was a break from her usual behavior. Some interpreted this as a deliberate choice to avoid revealing a changing body. Others suggested it reflected her mental state, a quiet withdrawal from a world that once celebrated her. The weeks leading up to August 27th paint an eerie timeline. On social media, Snelling still presented a curated version of herself. In July, she posted a TikTok where she listed her goals for the future. One of the emojis she chose was that of a mother holding a baby. Was this a cryptic confession, a subconscious acknowledgement of the child she carried, or simply coincidence? We may never know. But what we do know is this. By the early morning hours of August 27th, Snelling was in labor, alone in her bedroom. Her roommates, just down the hall, later recalled hearing noises. At first, they dismissed them, assuming maybe something had fallen or someone was moving around. But the sounds persisted for nearly an hour. They didn't realize what was happening until much later. The timeline matters because it highlights the isolation in which Snelling found herself. Whether by choice or by circumstance, she endured childbirth without medical help, without emotional support, and without guidance. For anyone who's given birth, the idea of doing so entirely alone is almost unimaginable. The pain, the physical danger, the emotional intensity, all compounded by secrecy. But the aftermath is where her choices crossed into criminal territory, wrapping her newborn in a towel, placing him in a bag, hiding him in a closet, attempting to clean the scene. These actions were deliberate. They weren't just about coping in the moment. They were about concealing what had happened. And then, perhaps most hauntingly, she walked out of the house, sat in her car, ordered McDonald's on her phone, tried, in some way, to reclaim normalcy. Before we go further, if you're following this story closely, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Stories like this require careful research and time to tell, and your support helps us keep shining a light on cases the world can't look away from. One of the most debated aspects of the case is whether the baby was born alive. Prosecutors say yes, pointing to Snelling's own admission that the infant moved and whimpered. They argue that she knew her baby showed signs of life, but failed to seek help. Instead, she allegedly fell asleep, later awakened to find that she had rolled onto her newborn, suffocating him. Her defense team, however, will likely argue otherwise. They may insist the baby was stillborn, and that any suggestion of life was either misremembered or misinterpreted into chaos. Forensic science will be central here. Tests like the lung float test could be introduced, though experts have long criticized its reliability. Other methods, such as microscopic analysis of lung tissue, could also come into play. But even if the baby was stillborn, Snelling's actions after birth remain criminal. Abuse of a corpse, concealment of a birth, tampering with evidence. These charges don't hinge on whether the baby lived, but they do speak to a lack of transparency and a desperate effort to hide the truth. The legal system has wrestled with similar cases before. We mentioned Brooke Skylar Richardson earlier, the Ohio teen whose secret birth and backyard burial of her baby drew national attention in 2017. Her case divided the public, with some believing she was a cold-blooded killer and others convinced she was simply a frightened young woman. In the end, the jury sided with the latter, convicting her only of abuse of a corpse. Another notorious case was that of Melissa Drexler, infamously nicknamed the Prom Mom. In 1997, Drexler secretly gave birth in a bathroom during her prom, then left the infant in a trash can. She later pled guilty to aggravated manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years in prison, serving just under 4. These cases reveal a pattern. Young women, often outwardly successful or popular, concealing pregnancies, delivering in secret, and taking drastic steps to hide the outcomes. Society struggles with how to judge them. Are they villains or victims? Cold and calculating, or trapped in fear and shame? Lakein Snelling's case now joins this disturbing lineage. Public reaction has been fierce. Online, opinion split into 2 camps. Some sympathize, pointing to the mental and emotional toll of concealed pregnancies, arguing that Snelling's choices came from panic and trauma. Others see no room for sympathy, insisting that the deliberate concealment of a child's death crosses into unforgivable territory. The role of her roommates in this story also can't be overlooked. Imagine their horror, discovering the body of a newborn in the closet of their friend and housemate. Their decision to call the police set everything in motion, but their trauma is rarely discussed in headlines. They too are victims in this story, caught in a nightmare they never expected. As the case moves toward trial, prosecutors will likely focus on intent. Did Snelling know her baby was alive? Did she choose not to help? Did she deliberately end his life? Or was this a tragedy compounded by fear and poor decisions? Her defense will point to her age, her mental state, and the possibility of stillbirth. They will argue that she was overwhelmed, scared, and not in her right mind when she made the choices she did. And the jury will have to decide, was this a crime of intent or a tragedy born of secrecy? Before we continue, if you believe cases like this deserve to be told and remembered, take a second to like this video. It helps us keep pushing these stories into the spotlight where they belong. The mystery of the baby's father lingers in the background. Court documents have been silent on his identity. Was he aware of the pregnancy? Did he deny it? Did Snelling hide it from him entirely? His absence from the narrative only deepens the sense of secrecy. One day, he may learn that he lost a child without ever realizing he had won. That revelation alone carries its own tragedy. Meanwhile, forensic investigators will continue to analyze every shred of evidence. From the digital traces on Snelling's phone to the physical remains recovered from her closet, each detail will be scrutinized. In a courtroom, every fact becomes a weapon, wielded by either side to craft a narrative of guilt or innocence. The outcome of this case will depend on more than just science. It will depend on storytelling, the story prosecutors tell the jury, and the story the defense presents in return. Was Snelling a frightened young woman caught in a moment of panic? Or was she a mother who chose concealment over care, silence over a cry for help? These questions linger, heavy and haunting, as the trial approaches. As the legal process moved forward, the courtroom became the stage where all of these haunting questions would converge. The prosecution had one central objective: to prove that Lakein Snelling's baby was born alive. If they could convince a jury that the infant showed signs of life and that Snelling's actions caused his death, the charges could escalate dramatically. The defense, on the other hand, had an equally focused goal: to cast doubt on those claims. They would argue that the baby was stillborn, that Snelling was traumatized, and that her actions after the fact were not signs of malice but of shock and confusion. One of the first battlegrounds was forensic medicine. Medical experts would be called to testify about the signs of life or lack thereof. If lung tissue floated in the infamous lung float test, the prosecution would argue that it proved breathing. If microscopic analysis showed air sacs open and expanded, they would claim it was evidence of respiration. But the defense would counter that these methods are unreliable, that decomposition, contamination, or even resuscitation attempts can mimic the results of live birth. It's a chilling thought that a young woman's fate and the legacy of her baby could hinge on whether or not microscopic bubbles of air existed in tiny cells of lung tissue. For the jury, the case would not just be about science. It would be about story. The prosecution's story was one of neglect. A mother who knew her baby was alive, chose not to help him, and hid his body. The defense's story was one of tragedy. A stillbirth, a young woman alone and terrified, making desperate decisions in the aftermath of an unimaginable event. Courtrooms are places of facts, but also of emotion. Jurors are human beings, and cases like this inevitably stir deep feelings. Some jurors may feel an instinctive pull towards sympathy, imagining themselves or their daughters in Snelling's shoes. Others may feel anger, convinced that no explanation can justify a newborn hidden in a closet. And then there is the question of intent. Did Snelling intend for her baby to die, or did she simply fail to act? Intent is often the hardest element for prosecutors to prove, because it requires insight into a person's state of mind. They must piece together clues, the steps she took to conceal the birth, the cleaning, the disposal, the silence, and argue that these choices reveal guilt. The defense will push back. They will argue that shock clouds judgment, that trauma causes irrational behavior. They may even call psychological experts to testify about denial of pregnancy, postpartum mental states, and the disassociation that sometimes follows traumatic births. As the trial unfolds, each side will fight to control the narrative. And outside the courtroom, the public continues to watch. On social media, debates rage. Some call Snelling a murderer. Others see her as a victim. Hashtags emerge. People argue in comment sections. And the case becomes more than just one woman's story. It becomes a cultural flashpoint about motherhood, responsibility, and the criminalization of young women's choices. This isn't new. America has a long history of sensationalizing cases like this, often giving them nicknames and reducing them to headlines. The prom mom, the cheerleader case. Now, perhaps the Kentucky cheerleader case. These names strip away complexity and paint women into stereotypes, villains or victims, monsters or martyrs. The truth is almost always more complicated. Before we continue, if you've stayed with us this far, take a moment to like and share this video. It helps spread awareness of stories like this, and it shows that people care about digging deeper into the truth rather than just settling for headlines. Legally, Snelling faces multiple possible outcomes. If convicted of the charges currently filed, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and concealing the birth of an infant, she could face several years in prison. If prosecutors escalate the charges to homicide and secure a conviction, she could be facing decades. If the defense successfully convinces a jury that the baby was stillborn and that Snelling's actions were a result of trauma, she could walk away with only minor convictions or even an acquittal. The uncertainty adds to the tension. Each court date brings new speculation. Each document file fuels fresh debate. For now, Snelling lives with her parents, awaiting trial, her future hanging in the balance. But beyond the courtroom, there are larger issues we must confront. Cases like this raise critical questions about how society deals with concealed pregnancies. Why do some women feel they cannot come forward? Why is the stigma so strong that secrecy feels safer than seeking help? And how can we prevent tragedies like this from happening again? Some argue that better sex education, more accessible health care, and stronger support systems could help. Others argue that fear of judgment, not lack of resources, drives concealment. And still others point to cultural pressures, the weight of expectations, and the image young women feel they must uphold. Whatever the answers, one thing is certain. Hidden pregnancies and secret births are not as rare as many might believe. Each year, cases surface across the country, some ending in tragedy, others discovered in time for intervention. Snelling's story is just one of many, but it has captured attention because of who she was, because of her image, and because of the heartbreaking details uncovered. And what about the roommates? They remain a silent part of this tragedy. Their lives were upended the moment they stepped into Snelling's room and discovered the unimaginable. They called police, but their trauma did not end there. They now carry the memory of what they saw, and perhaps the burden of asking themselves if they could have done something sooner. The trial will eventually bring a verdict, but no verdict will erase what happened in that house. A baby was lost. A young woman's life was derailed. Friends were traumatized. A community was shaken. And somewhere a father, known or unknown, may one day learn the truth about a child he never got to meet. Before we close, let's take a moment to reflect. Stories like this are not easy to tell, and they are not easy to hear. They force us to look at uncomfortable realities, about secrecy, about shame, about the thin line between accident and crime. They remind us that behind every headline is a life, a family, a set of choices and consequences that ripple outward in ways no one can fully predict. So what will happen to Lakein Snelling? Only time and the courts will decide. But no matter the verdict, this case leaves behind lessons we cannot ignore. If you've watched this far, thank you for staying with us. Make sure you're subscribed, because we will follow this case all the way through the trial and beyond. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe this was a tragic accident or something more deliberate? We want to hear your perspective. And don't forget to share this video with others, because these are the stories that need be discussed, not hidden away. In the end, the story of Lakein Snelling is about more than one young woman. It's about the clash between public image and private reality, the choices we make in moments of crisis, and the devastating consequences that follow. It is about life, death, secrecy, and truth, and the fragile line that separates them.